Good day, everybody, and welcome to today's World Cafe. Let's talk about childhood obesity. My name is Christian Breuer. I'm a sociologist at the University of Amsterdam and one of the work package leads in Co-Create. We are organizing this together with World Obesity Federation, with PEN, Best Remap, and STOP. And in this series of World Cafe meetings, to which we today are happy to have about 170 participants from all over the world, in this series we talk about childhood and youth obesity in general, and we talk about the roots. In the past, we talked about the roots of childhood obesity and means to improve food and physical activity environments. And today we want to be a bit more specific. Today we will talk about youth engagement. We will talk about how youth is engaged in policy-making efforts, in youth-led dialogues, and how youth can meaningfully be involved and come up with policy actions, interventions, ideas, and discuss those. And we are convinced that this is very timely, considering that the Youth Day was held in August and in advance of the UN Food System Summit. Now, before we actually go to our program proper, I have a few housekeeping announcements to make. As you might have imagined, the event will be recorded. We are very happy to take your questions, and we have people sitting ready to work with the questions in the Q&A. And the recording and the slides will be circulated after the event. Now let's take a brief look at today's agenda. Now, after I'm done, we will go to my colleague Arnfinn Helleve, who will talk about policy actions from kind of literature and overview point of view. And then we will go to the main part that will be facilitated by my colleague Marianne de Billion. And that will be an exercise in using our dialogue forum tool, the tool that EAT has developed and is employing in youth-led dialogues in a very successful way. And when we have showcased this and come up with some ideas regarding youth engagement, I will again close this meeting. Now, let me say just a few words about Co-Create, the project I'm working in. It's, as many projects, it's a huge project with a lot of activities. But what we are focusing on today is also in the center of the slide that you can now see, and that is working with youth. So what we are doing in Co-Create, we collect available policies, we look at research evidence, we do system mapping exercises, and then in work package 5 and 6, we work together with young people in 5 European countries, people aged 16 to 18, and we generate with them policy ideas. We use the system maps, we use the evidence, and we, first of all, brainstorm about how does the food environment look from your perspective as a young member of an alliance, maybe in Portugal, in Lisbon, or here in Amsterdam. So how does the food system and the obesogenic system look like from your perspective? And what would you do if you were able to change it? And after generating ideas and building a group, we then with them refine the policy ideas in a series of participatory action research steps. We might do interviews, we might test out ideas, we might share with, use a budget to try out those ideas. And then we would also engage with other stakeholders in the field. Could be stakeholders very near to young people, like teachers, could be industry representatives. And in that phase, we also did dialogue fora. We engaged youth and stakeholders in a structured dialogue, and you will hear much more about this later today. And after talking to several stakeholders and going through several rounds, Then in the latest phase of the project, we will kind of evaluate this effort and model them and to see, because we cannot implement the ideas in a 5 years framework, we will model the ideas and see if they might have effect on the obesogenic system. Now, this is what we are doing in general. We have been doing this for 2 years now with almost 200 youth in 5 European countries. Has been a very intense and very interesting process, sometimes on a very small scale with just a few young people, sometimes a bit larger groups like 20 or 25. And all of them were very knowledgeable about their current situation, about political problems in their situation, and about the relevance of food and health in their situation, and how this could be amended, improved from a political point of view. So we are happy to have been working with young people for sometimes half a year, sometimes a year, or even longer. And we are now kind of in the last phase of finalizing those product policy ideas and modeling them. Now, while this is the general overview, the activities with young people are still ongoing. Today, we are launching an opportunity for young people to get a stipend from us to keep on working on policy ideas and policy implementation. So if you're interested in working with us, working with Procreate, if you have interesting ideas, or if you know people in your network who might be eligible for working on novel policy ideas to tackle childhood and youth obesity, we have stipends. Please come forward, share your ideas with us, and maybe you can get a stipend. We also have a youth task force that has come out of our collaboration with young people, and we have several other activities like a youth conference coming up. And if I'm correct, links to those events will be shared with you as I speak in the chat. Now, this is it in a nutshell. We have been working with young people. We are still working with them, and we will continue to work them in several settings, and you're invited to participate. And to make this a bit more tangible, so what it is actually about working with young people, how can this be done in a meaningful way, and to showcase what we are doing, we're now going to see how a dialogue with young people works. But first of all, my colleague Arnfinn Helve from the Norwegian Institute of Public Health will give you an overview of current state of knowledge regarding policy actions and interventions targeting young people. Arnfinn, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. So my name is Arnfinn. I work at the Institute of Public Health in Oslo, as Christian introduced. So I will just briefly take you through the evidence for policy actions and interventions targeting young people, more with a traditional lens, scientific lens. Next slide, please. So in Procreate, we have done an overview of systematic reviews, meaning that we try to summarize the evidence of effectiveness of interventions targeting young people in particular. And when we talk about young people, we had the age limit of 10 to 19 years. And when we summarized this research, we did not find any evidence of interventions that have particularly big or effects at all on BMI or BMI set scores. There was some evidence of effectful intervention targeting dietary behavior. For instance, like intervention targeting intake of sugar-sweetened beverage in particular, also positive beneficial effects of policy on dietary behaviors if the school had such. And with regard to effectiveness of policy actions targeting physical activity, we did not find systematic reviews who reported of large effect. Also wanted to say that for the majority of these interventions, the school setting was the most used setting, and most of the interventions were targeting individual behavior change. And with regard to our the topic of the seminar today, it was also important now to state that there was no almost no focus or discussion of involvement in youth in these systematic reviews, which kind of point to a gap. Next slide, please. So one of the recent systematic reviews that have been done on obesity prevention targeting children and young people has been done by it's a Cochrane review done by Nobles and colleagues. And one of the interesting thing with their systematic review that they did a follow-up study where they try to analyze the profile of the interventions, and this is similar to what we have found, and this is just one of many ways of describing it. But if you see on the left side with the different colors, they are reflecting various settings, and for the red lines bars, that will be the red one represent causes, how the causes are related to different socio-ecological settings, and then on the right side they have tried to sort or distribute the actions or the policy actions described in the literature. So the main point with this description is to show that one of the limitations with the research, the scientific summarized research findings, is that that there are very few studies on, for instance, on a more structural level or societal level, while the majority of the interventions are targeting the individual level. So this is one of the explanation of why the evidence is limited. And I just added a quote from Noble saying that this is because they have been also looking back in history to see how things have developed, and they still think that there is this still a very much heavy focus on downstream individualistic determinants of obesity, instead of, which is in despite of our understanding that there are so many factors at different levels that impact and should be targeted by interventions. Next slide, please. And then the final slide for me then is to just to point to this topic of today with involvement of youth. There is within the project there is a paper in preparation which as the scoping review mainly focus on UK, to see to what extent the young people are involved in policy making processes, and they have found so far that there are kind of different roles. Either youth are involved in an advisory role, they are involved by identifying priorities and goals, research design, and synthesizing outputs and dissemination. And there is another not that old publication, also a scope review, that have been looking at the similar topic about involvement by youth in interventions, and they use the theoretical framework to try to distinguish between the various type of involvement. And their conclusion is that most of the times when young people are involved, they will be involved as informants, meaning that they will be asked about their opinion, they will share their opinion. But a few examples where young people are involved as decision maker, that will be in the cases where we are talking about young people as patients, for instance, children and young people with cancer as an example. Thank you. This was what I wanted to say.
Excellent, Arnfinn. Thank you very much. And listening to this, there is really still a need for both more knowledge, but definitely more interventions that are on a structural, systemic, large-scale level. Interventions that do not only address individual behavior, and definitely, as you have shown, there is a strong need for these kind of knowledges and interventions when it comes to youth and young people. And I'm happy to say that from my point of view, at least, what we are seeing in Co-Create is that engaging young people in more than just an informant role, really co-creating ideas with them, giving them the space and also the money to test out ideas, does in some cases remain on a individual and behavioral basis, but young people are very knowledgeable about society and about political processes and problems, and they come up with a lot of interesting ideas that go beyond their immediate individual and peer behavior. Now, again, thank you, Arnfinn. And now let's go to our next part, and that will be introduced by Mariana de Billion. Mariana, can I give you the word to tell us what exactly we will be doing?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Christian. So today we will be doing a dialogue forum. And if my colleague Samantha could share the slides, then we can start jumping straight into the presentation. Perfect. So I'm going to start by saying welcome to our dialogue forum, and a particular welcome to our speakers in today's dialogue forum. My name is Mariana. I come from EAT, and I will be moderating today's dialogue. And today we will be using an interactive dialogue forum tool developed for the Co-Create project, where our speakers will be discussing a topic of highly importance, namely meaningful youth engagement and inclusion. Next slide, please. But first, what is a dialogue forum? Through EAT's role in Co-Create, we have developed a dialogue forum model meant to facilitate youth-led policy dialogues with policymakers, business leaders, and other stakeholders, and to collectively identify action and commitments. The tool is designed to be youth-led and youth-facilitated, and also to ensure a 50-50 youth to stakeholder ratio. We've developed a physical and a digital version of the tool, and today we will be using the latter to facilitate a dialogue on meaningful youth engagement and inclusion. Next slide, please. The purpose of the forums is for youth to get feedback on the relevance and feasibility of their policy idea, to connect with decision makers to transition from idea to implementation, and to gain a better understanding of the policy issue from multiple perspectives. For Co-Create, this means to politicize the issue of obesity, empower youth and position youth as agents of change, and develop new ways of holding an intergenerational dialogue. Next slide, please. The dialogue forums were initially in person using a physical tool. However, due to COVID-19, we developed a digital tool to facilitate dialogue despite the global pandemic. And the digital tool uses a combination of Zoom and Google Slides, where all participants are able to discuss and populate their ideas on this canvas that you can see on this slide. Today, key messages from the speakers will be captured on the tool by using the annotation function on Zoom, showcasing how the tool can be used for interactive and engaging dialogues. Next slide, please. As the next generation of decision makers, young people must be involved in shaping the policies and decisions of today, particularly those that affect them most. And as previously mentioned, today's dialogue will be on meaningful youth engagement and inclusion. Next slide, please. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome our two youth leaders and two adult stakeholders to the dialogue forum today, who bring a wealth of experience and knowledge on youth inclusion and engagement to the table. So we'll start with our first youth leader, Dara, joining us from France. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, everybody. My name is Dara Karakolis. I'm a public health nutritionist. I'm living in France, but I'm Canadian, and I'm currently working with the Food Foundation and as the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign coordinator. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Dara. Next is Priya from India. Over to you.
Hi, Mariana. I hope I'm audible. My name is Priya Prakash, and I'm from New Delhi, India. I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Health Set Go, and we work with young people across India to promote health and well-being at the school level. So we involve young leaders in schools and universities to stand up for health and well-being. And apart from that, just like what Dara said, I'm also a youth ambassador in India for the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Priya. Now with our adult stakeholders, first is Darcy joining us from the US. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Darcy Williams. I'm a program officer at UNICEF HQ, where I work at the nutrition section. I focus on the portfolio of the prevention of childhood overweight obesity in low and middle income countries, with a special focus on youth engagement in food system transformation. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And finally, Mojca from Slovenia, over to you.
Thank you so much. My name is Mojca Gabrielčič. I'm coming from the National Institute of Public Health. I'm a senior advisor there. I'm the Best Remap coordinator and also the EuroHealthNet president. So that's for the beginning. And today's opportunity and event also as a sharing and learning opportunity for me. So looking very much forward to the dialogue.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We can jump into the next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, the focus of today's dialogue forum is meaningful youth engagement and inclusion, with an emphasis on meaningful, because it recognizes the need for diverse representation that goes beyond tokenism and seeks to change the power structures that prevent young people from being considered experts in regard to their own needs and priorities, while also building their leadership capacities. So let's start diving into the dialogue forum, and we can jump onto the next slide for our first activity. So I would like to kick this dialogue off by asking all speakers to share from your own point of view, how would you define meaningful youth engagement and inclusion? And I would also want to encourage you to maybe share an example as well. So let's do this in turn. We can start by hearing from Mojca, please.
Thank you so much. I have to say that all what I have heard and what it was said in the beginning, in the introduction, is the meaningful engagement. It means that young people are not just sitting there, are not just informing the processes, but are really engaged. If it's just from the theory, in the feeling of coherence, if you feel coherent in the situation, it means that you are heard, you are engaged, you are heard, and you also have the impact of what you are doing. Then you feel like being meaningfully engaged. My first memories about when I learned how important that is when we at the National Institute were producing the teaching materials, the education materials for driving license and alcohol for youth. And when we applied with the project, it was really coming from our heads, our understanding of the situation. But at that time, we were already that informed about the mixed methods and importance of this new public health paradigm to work with people, not for people. So we did some focus groups. And afterwards, we just were sitting around the table, looking at her and saying to each other, no, it's no go. What we thought, we have to listen to young people. We have to work together with them. So.
Oh, Mojca, I think the connection is a little poor. Okay.
Engaged participation of youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mojca. I think the connection on your side might be a little unstable, or is it just from my side maybe?
Okay.
But thank you so much.
No, I will check it.
Yeah, thank you so much. But maybe we can then hear from Dara next, please.
Sure, thank you so much. So for me, I would say meaningful youth engagement encompasses youth being involved equally from all stages of a process. So I would say from the conception of an idea, through the planning, implementation, and all the way through to the evaluation of whatever you're doing, whether that's a campaign, a project. I would say that this is key to having meaningful youth engagement. And I mean, co-create is a perfect example. And I think in the presentation, you gave a really good outline of how that is happening within the project. I will say from my personal experience working with Act for Food, Act for Change, it has been a really good example as well of youth engagement. And I feel that our voice, my voice, and the voices of all of my fellow youth leaders have been heard. And by kind of staffing young people to be a part of the campaign and running the campaign has given us like the freedom to run with our ideas and giving us financial support, given us the kind of capacity to make mistakes and to be able to find solutions on our own. So that's been a really, really great example of meaningful engagement, I would say.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Maybe Darcy, do you want to go next?
I'm fine with going next, but I feel like Priya is next on the list, so I don't want to cut her off. But if Priya is okay, I can go, or she can go as she wishes.
We will mix up the order as we go with the activities. It was just me trying to be a bit creative. So please go ahead, Darcy.
Throwing off the flow. No problem. So from my perspective, meaningful youth engagement probably has three parts. One is, as you've already mentioned, Mariana, is to avoid tokenization. The second part would be to prioritize participatory discussion techniques that are going to create a safe space for all voices, not just the most privileged and well-connected and most educated. And then third would be, on top of these things, a genuine commitment to integrate those generated youth ideas into established programs and policies. Otherwise, you can generate all these ideas that you want, but if they're not going to get integrated in anything, that's pretty useless. And I'm proud to say that an example, I think a good example of this would be what we've just done at UNICEF in terms of in the last 3 months, we've hosted over 60 food systems dialogues in 18 countries around the world, taking the usual model of food system dialogues for the summit, but working with a youth research organization, Western Sydney University, and developing it to be a lot more participatory for young people. And we generated insights from 700 young people around the world, really diving deep into their lived experiences in food systems, from food poverty to climate change. And then with a rigorous quantitative and qualitative analysis at the end, our research partners produced an insights report. And we're taking this, well, soon we're gonna have a launch event on the 21st of September, which is quite exciting. But UNICEF as an organization in nutrition, we're taking these insights and we're integrating them into our new food systems approach to nutrition. And so I think this it's been a pretty good example of meaningfully engaging young people along the way and then integrating their ideas at the end.
Great, thank you so much. Priya, finally, over to you.
Thank you. It was lovely to hear the points that have been made by everyone. I think they're extremely valid. So I'll try to bring another angle to it. I think we're living in a time where it's the decade of youth activism. And I think youth voices across history possibly have been discounted, but I think simply a lot of those voices cannot be, cannot afford to be discounted anymore. I think many times young people's opinion are considered unscientific, unprofessional, possibly people feel like including very young people into a conversation might take away from the conversation. For example, if you're trying to solve a problem of childhood obesity, or if you're trying to solve a problem that concerns young people, I've seen way too often that there is no young person present on the table or no young person listening or being consulted. And it was great to see that, at UNICEF, you're doing that. But I have seen in many consultations, it's not happening. But at the same time, I feel like some of the best solutions can come out right from the mouth of these young people. They don't have to be as scientific or as complicated. I think a lot of times young people can give great ideas, great suggestions, great solutions to the problems that they are facing themselves. And I think it's really important to have their voice heard at the table. And so what I would say is that every time we have a discussion around a decision being made that directly concerns young people, meaningful youth engagement and inclusion would mean having a young person there to articulate the problem the way they are facing it, to articulate the solution the way they want to receive the solution as well. And that's what I would say would mean meaningful youth engagement.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's jump to the next activity. So now I would like to ask you all to identify the main barriers to meaningful youth engagement and inclusion in policy and decision-making processes at national levels. Maybe we now can start with Dara.
All right. I think that this point has, already been brought up a couple of times, but I would say that one of the main barriers is still to meaningful engagement is tokenism, and is that decision makers are not really giving young people the power and the responsibility. They're just kind of ticking a box, and we're still seeing it now. If there's not meaningful inclusion, then we can't really kind of break free from this. We have a lot of skill sets as young people, and I think that there's a lack of acceptance of this. And I think since we've talked about this a lot, I'm going to try to think of another option or another barrier that's come to my mind a lot is access. So if we focus on a lot of since COVID has happened, consultations have been online, and we haven't been able to, reach a lot of our offline or rural communities in all of our countries. And I think that that's another kind of barrier that we're facing that's maybe different than tokenism. But I think it's really important because a lot of these communities are the people that are being impacted the most. And I would imagine that youth are still not being listened to in these communities, just like in online communities as well. So this is kind of the two barriers that are really sticking out to me in terms of us not being able to move forward in meaningful youth engagement.
Great, thank you so much, Tara. Maybe Moitza wants to go next.
Yes, can't agree more with what was said till now. What I was thinking about is that when we were preparing the strategy or longevity strategy for Slovenia, it was so difficult to convince the civil organizations of old people that young people are also the ones who can say something about the longevity. And we strategically approach it. So it means there are young people, somehow adults and older adults, and the roles here have changed in recent decades. I would say we have more and more generations who are fit to be in the driving seat, and how to deal with that, because I think maybe a century ago, people with 25 were already leading the households, they were leading even the society and whatever was happening. So now we have people with 70 who are still feeling that they are the ones to lead. So there are more generations. So that's also something what we could touch as one of the barriers. And also what we found in our stakeholders research is that we mainly work with, when we speak about the stakeholders, we mainly work with formal stakeholders groups, and young people are not that formalized. It's sometimes even difficult to reach the stakeholders groups of young people. So maybe we should be more concerned about the non-formal forms of organization of young people. So that might be helpful. And yeah, that's, I think, all from now from my side, but interesting to listen, yeah, what will be said, and I could add afterwards. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Priya, do you want to go next?
Yes. Apart from the issues that have been highlighted, I think transparency in the policy-making process, I feel, is an issue. Many times we don't know as citizens or young people, let's say, when these policies are being made behind closed doors, or what are the discussions that are going on when these policies are being made. And so I feel like that if we have greater transparency and more call outs for young people to be participating in these policy making processes, that would be a huge thing, because I do feel like people who have a voice, they are looking for a platform, they're looking for these forums to actually represent the voice of the youth, but are unable to know when those forums are happening or get invited to these conversations. So I think that's really important. And secondly, I feel right from the education system level, if there is a promotion of young people in policy, Are young people looking at policy making are as a career path as well? Can we start from that time where they are given a bridge into policy from a very young age? I feel like this could be something that would really encourage the transparency piece. And another, comment in the chat section about sharing a positive example about young people being included in policy. So I wanted to take an example from India. And I run an organization where we are promoting health and wellness education about nutrition in schools in India. And I remember thinking that 10 years down the line is going to be a time where I will be able to approach a policymaker and tell them that, hey, nutrition education should be in schools in India. And just 2 years into the process, I get a call from the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India, which is a regulatory body here. And the person who was heading the authority, he says, why don't you come into my office and actually show us what you've been working on? And I thought, and that really flipped for me the way I viewed the policy and the political system, because I never thought that young people like me would be included in that conversation. And we actually went on to developing this thing called the Eat Right India initiative, where we reached out to thousands of children in India through these creative competitions where children, more than 100,000 children, were involved in creating artworks and creating messages and slogans about food and about nutrition. So I think that was a beautiful example. But I do believe that if I hadn't gotten the call and if I had to approach the authorities, it would have been very difficult the other way around. So I would really appreciate if there was more accessibility to the authorities in general. But yes, that was a positive example for sure.
Yeah, I am very impressed. Thank you so much for sharing that example. All right, over to you, Darcy.
Wow, that was a fabulous example that Priya just gave. And I also enjoyed the other points about tokenization being a barrier, this idea that youth as a stakeholder group are a little bit difficult to access, and then also just the general idea of transparency. And I would just add to that, just in general, that young people just don't have the same seat at a policy discussion table as adults. And when they do, it's usually the most privileged and well-connected. And I think this is a problem from United States to Cameroon. Young people aren't usually taken seriously in government circles. And I think this is often because they're not an important voting bloc, and they don't have the same financial backing as private interests. And so I see these aspects as major barriers, but it also, I think, as we heard before from Dara, that this is the generation of like youth activism, and things are changing. And I think you see some politicians feeling the heat from youth activism and knowing that they have to start responding to certain demands. I definitely have some political suggestions that I will not say as with my UNICEF hat in terms of voting ages and all that. But yeah, so not really having a seat at the table is for me the biggest barrier, and I'm sure we'll talk about how co-create changes that.
Great, thank you so much, Darcy. Let's jump on to our third activity, where we will be addressing these barriers that we just identified. And the question is then, how can we overcome these barriers in order to achieve meaningful youth engagement and inclusion at national levels? And I think you've all started touching on this already, but maybe we could have some more concrete examples, specific examples of what exactly can be done to overcome these barriers. So maybe we can start with Moitza, please.
What my mind when I was thinking about the whole exercise of today, I think that there might be some mechanisms which are used for the female engagement, as for instance quorum, and that specific percentage or a share of people participating in any of activity cycle. Then the key are resources. So if you have funds which are also shared more transparently and more fairly among the generations, then that would also work, I think. That the people, what that means, the demographic voting, how important is the vote for the options they to see, and also I think indicators could be better used. So we have some very powerful mechanisms like it's the EU semester, and the indicators there are somehow encouraging member states to act in specific areas. And it might be, I don't know if that's possible, but it might be developed that also the policy system is and the engagement of different groups, including young people, could be measured specific indicators. And I think it's really how to engage non-formalized actions of youth that might work too. Thanks. Back to you.
Thank you so much. Maybe we can jump over to Priya, please.
Yes. So I think we have touched upon a lot of solutions, but one thing that I feel would really make a huge impact is if we can have policy changes, in organizations, even in the governments, to have a mandatory representation of young people in consultations. Because at the end of the day, like what Darcy was saying, the youth are not exactly looked at, very seriously, for the lack of a better word, in these consultations, primarily because of financial backing or because they're not a good voting bloc, etc. So to remove these as the incentives, I think the only way to do it is to have a mandatory policy possibly around this, where young people have to be represented whenever there is a policy being made, at least those policies that are directly impacting them, although I would argue that every policy made today will impact all young people in the future. But also apart from that, even in organizations and corporates and businesses, I feel like if there is an inclusion of a youth advisory board, I think that can really help. If there's an advisory seat given to a young person in an organization, that can really help. Of course, depends on the nature of the organization, but a lot of organizations are impacting young people. There's a lot of unhealthy marketing to children, for example, with a lot of consumer companies. So it's always good to have young people representation to understand what their voices are, what they would like for organizations and businesses to do. For example, with the Act for Food, Act for Change campaign that Dara and I are part of, I think a huge part of that is to get the voice of young people heard by businesses and governments. But we should not have to have a campaign like this for that to happen. And unless it's a policy, that is mandatory, I don't feel like this change will happen soon enough. So that would be my recommendation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Maybe Dara, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah. I would definitely start by echoing what Priya said. That was something that came to my mind first, was that we need to make it mandatory, but also not just including young people, but employing young people. I think when we think of youth, at least from Act for Food, Act for Change, we say youth as under 30, and under 30 has a large part of that group is people that are in the job force. So yeah, you're youth too, Darcy. Hi. But exactly, like we need to be employing young people because we have the education, we have the skill sets, we have, even if we don't have these things, we have the knowledge, we live the experience of some of these things, specifically when we're looking at obesity as a kind of, pandemic, epidemic. It's really important that we make it a priority. But the last thing I just want to point out is that we need to change the narrative. I think we need to change the way that people are thinking about youth. We need to, have more conversations with decision makers to make sure that this mindset is shifted so that we see the value and we see the impact of how young people can, affect these big issues.
Great, thank you so much. And Darcy, over to you.
I loved a lot of these ideas. And I think Moicha was saying, she was breaking up, but I was enjoying listening to some ideas about equitable financing and splitting, getting funds and financial backing into the hands of young policymakers to continue generating and advocating and lobbying for their ideas. And I also agree with Priya, where every single policy decision affects young people. If it doesn't affect them already directly today, it affects them tomorrow. And we've seen the effects of young people not having a seat at the table with climate policies. And now who's going to suffer the biggest brunt of that? It's going to be young people. And I do appreciate it, Dara. Under 30s, I am a young person in this conversation. But I would just also, the question does focus on national levels. I would also push at the organizational level. I really like the idea of youth boards are quite powerful. And I have lots of friends that sit on youth action boards for NGOs and organizations. And it's not only right, it's not only equitable, but it's smart, because young people are really, really clever. They know where the tides are turning. They know how the world is going to look. They know it better than kind of older people in decision-making seats of power. So yeah, and then to be honest, projects like Co-Create and a project that brings intergenerational safe space discussion platforms where young people get to work in a very participatory manner using tools like this and feel like their voice is actually being heard and listened to and engaged with at a very serious level. So this project is one of those shining examples.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Darcy. We are a bit short on time. So for our final activity, I'm going to ask you to say one sentence, if you can manage. I know this is a big question. How can we ensure that youth priority actions to address adolescent overweight and obesity are consistently incorporated in high-level discussions, such as the forthcoming UN Food Systems Summit? And if we can try to keep this super, super brief, I would be I would appreciate that a lot. So let's jump straight into it and start with Dara.
All right. I'll just say, we as young people, for those who are watching, we have a lot of power. We are consumers, and a lot of us, we are voters. So I would say use your power wisely. Go out and make those decisions that you think will impact, systemic change, but also make choices that you think will impact obesity and overweight in your area.
That was perfect. Thank you so much, Dara. Moitza, please.
Yeah, from my side and from the side of big projects where more than 25 or 24 member states of EU are engaged, we can say that we will be producing roadmap, and we will try to use all the learnings from Co-Create and STOP when producing it. So please come up with good recommendations in both projects, and we will try to make as much as possible in the implementation at the implementation side of the member states. But definitely we have to take huge care of the equity. It was meant already before, so that really everyone has a vote, not just those who are more who are socioeconomically more better standing or who are better educated. Yeah, so that we take care of all. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Darcy, over to you.
I'm glad Priya is going to go last, because I'm sure she's going to wrap it up really well. I would say, going to be a conjoined sentence. Despite a lot of other challenges, I do think the summit has done an incredible job at integrating young people from start to finish, more so than I've seen in any sort of UN high-level negotiations before. And I would just say organizations also need to make institutional change where youth engagement becomes ingrained and cuts across all aspects of policies and programs, and really becomes institutionalized.
Great, thank you so much. And Priya, finally over to you.
A lot of pressure to wrap it up. Yes, but if I had to summarize what everyone has said, because I think everything has been said, but I think overweight and obesity cannot be ignored if we need to achieve the SDGs. And I think a lot of people are waking up to that non-communicable diseases and obesity have a direct linkage. There are a lot of people suffering. If today there are millions of children which are overweight and obese, specifically in the last 2 years with the COVID-19 pandemic, the rates of obesity have jumped, and it is a crisis. And I feel like people have understood that, but how to get youth priority actions there to address the challenge, I think that will happen through institutionalizing a lot of these young movements, youth dialogues, having these campaigns done at a high level, just like what we're doing right now. And I think this effort has to be consistent throughout the year. It can't, I think, only happen in September. It has to happen throughout the year. And if we can keep that momentum going, and if we can start that movement from the grassroots, and I'm so happy to be part of some of these movements which are happening in every country, because I think this is a problem that is not discriminating to any country around the world at this point. Every country is going through this problem. So if we can have those movements running throughout the year, and then when the high level discussions happen, create space for that. Like Darcy was saying, I think this year has been great for more representation, but of course, a lot more can be done.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank our brilliant speakers for an inspiring dialogue and for sharing and contributing with your expertise, time, and reflections around the importance of why youth should be meaningfully included in decision-making processes. And it is indeed crucial that the level of youth participation is youth-initiated and youth-led. And on that note, today we are launching the Co-Create Youth Stipends, where we want to invite young people between 16 to 25 years old living in Europe to submit an application for Co-Create to fund your activity or initiative that can help build healthier food and physical activity environments in your school or your community through dialogue, advocacy, research, or other action. If you would like to learn more about the Co-Create Youth Stipends, we welcome you to join us for the Road to the Youth conference meeting today at 8 p.m. Central European Time. And this meeting is both a preparatory meeting for the Co-Create Youth conference in March and an open Q&A for potential applicants of the youth stipends. But you will hear more about this in just a minute. Once again, thank you so much to our fantastic speakers, and back to you, Christian.
Yes, thank you, Mariana, and thank you all the speakers. This was very lively. I really appreciate your presence and your engagement. It's difficult to do these kind of things in an online environment, but from my point of view, you came across very, very convincingly and strong. And although we have just very brief time now, there are a few clear takeaways. So there is, at least among the people speaking now, and also in the projects we have in Co-Create across Europe, there is a strong feeling of a need for more youth participation. And I guess we are at the point where we can definitely move from projects and tryouts to a more institutionalized structural form of participation. And we have just heard a number of proposals towards this: a paid position, a structural position at the table, voting rights. There is a lot we can do. There's a lot you can take with you from this talk in your respective projects and countries to really move from big innovative projects into structural political changes. And there is indeed, as Priya said, a strong link with development goals. So obesity is crucial in the developmental perspective. And keep in mind what Arnfinn said in the beginning. Although we are aware of structural and systemic injustices and pressures, there is little done to move projects from focusing on individual action to structural change. So I want everybody present today strongly urge to not to move upstream. We keep on saying this, but we ourselves are also time and again then moving back to the lower levels, to what is feasible, what is measurable, and try some interventions there. So let's all together move further upstream. as Marianne said, to follow up on this, there are several possibilities. She has shared some links with you. Let me also mention that there is another World Cafe, and that's coming up September the 28th, if I'm correct. Yes, thank you for this slide. We have a dialogue forum, which is much more extensive than what we have just done. In Portugal, 29th of September, and I invite you to come to these meetings or to reach out to either of us, to me, to Mariana, to everybody who was speaking and engaging here and now. We are happy to share both our general views, but also detailed experiences and protocols and practices we have developed in engaging youth over the last 3 years. So, as I said, I guess the main takeaway message should be to engage young people more structurally. But I also want to end with a kind of reflection. If we would only focus on young people, then we would just replace one false hope with another one. I guess just following the lead of young people, although they are important, would kind of lead us in the wrong direction. I guess engaging young people in a meaningful way also means, from my point of view, that we all have to learn, and that means we learn from young people, me not being a young person, I have to learn from young people, but the other way around is equally true. Young people can learn from others. So it's not, we should also go beyond listening, just thinking in terms of listening to young people, but learning and engaging and building a democratic process where we collaborate on solving issues rather than just listening to this or that group. So there are a few more moments to ask your questions in the Q&A. Maybe the Q&A will also stay open for a little more time. As said, we are happy to take all questions through mail later on. I want to thank all the participants and in particular EAT and World Obesity Federation and our speakers and panelists for this excellent 1 hour of very engaged and very productive session. Thank you all very much and hope to see you online or in person in due course. Have a nice day.